Well, welcome to December's reading recap, where I share the books that I read that month. Unlike November, when I had quite the reading slump, I was finally able to break the reading slump in December. And that all started with Kara Swanson's new book coming out next summer, or I guess it's this summer now because it's 2024, Ignite. So I can't even share cover. I can't do this and the cover appears because there is no cover. I beta read it. Let's just start with, when this book comes out, you need to buy it. When pre-orders happen, you need to pre-order. This book was amazing. And let me just say, this book made the top 10 of all the books I read in 2023, which is a video that I'm going to be putting out next week. So make sure that you stay tuned. It's just so good. It's such a unique concept and the writing is amazing. Let's just start with this. Kara is the queen of cliffhangers. So seriously, if you need to take a break while reading the book, once it comes out, stop in the middle of a chapter. Don't wait till the end of a chapter, because once the end of the chapter rolls around, you're not going to be able to stop reading. Bottom line, you're just going to read the book all the way through probably, because it's just that good. The two guys in it are just an incredible duo. It's just hilarious. One of them has ill-timed lines that are the perfect comedic relief. And the other guy, he is just so sweet and so amazing. The ending with all her lie and her truth, and it all comes together. It's just so gripping and so powerful. I mean, it was just so awesome. There's so many angles in this story, with Mara, who's the main character, just having no idea who to trust. And Kara did an amazing job with leading on the reader. So I honestly had no idea who to trust. I had an idea of who an antagonist was, and obviously there were some villain characters that you really knew were the bad guys, but even the villain characters might have had a moment of truth where they were actually saying the right thing, but you had no idea who to believe, and those are just so much fun. I loved the story. Just to wrap up what I thought about the book, since I beta read it, I left her a lot of comments in the Google Doc, and I'll just read the last part of a long comment I left when I had just finished reading, and it is, all I can say is wow, wow, wow. I am just so happy I decided to read this, even on a tight deadline. I've been in a reading slump lately, and for the first time in over a month, I've actually had a drive to read. Just wow. Thank you so much for sharing this with me, Kara. And I think that sums it up pretty well. So when this book comes out, you need to read it because it is just amazing. The writing, the story, all the emotions, it all ties together. It's just so gripping and amazing. I could not put it. The next book I read is The Juliet Code by Pepper Basham. So I actually met Pepper earlier this summer at the ACFW conference, and she was just so sweet. My friend loves her books, and so she actually took me up to her room at the conference to get some stickers and bookmarks and all that stuff that was themed for her books, and it was such a fun moment, and she was just absolutely so sweet and kind and encouraging with asking about what I was writing and my stories, and I pitched her my story, and she thought it was just so cool, and she was just so sweet and so kind. So I was so excited to get to read this new book that she just released at the beginning of December. Let's just start with this. It reminds me a lot of Clue. And yes, I'm talking about the board game. It's just, there's such a wide cast of characters, and you just have to focus on all the different characters to kind of figure out who is telling the truth, what's going on. It was a light read. It was not nearly as emotional and dark and heart-gripping and heart-wrenching as the previous book I read with Ignite, but it was a really fun, light read. And I will say, one of my favorite things is when I can call it on characters, and I did a couple times, which is just makes my reader heart so happy, because it's the best thing when it's like, I knew that character was saying this, and I was right, and I was finally right. And when it's like a murder mystery thing, it's awesome to actually be right. I also really enjoyed Grace, who is the main character in this story. She's a really fun protagonist with all of her creativity and spunk, and she loves to read, which was so fun to have all the different characters dropping. She would mention like Pride and Prejudice and all sorts of other different classics and novels in the story, which was just fun, having read all those myself and loving them. So it was such a fun, lighthearted read. Often with murder mysteries, I feel like there's two different categories, where it's either like the really dark, depressing, way too intense, which I love sort of book, but then there's also the fun murder mysteries that are casual and light, and this was definitely a fun murder mystery. So it did involve some pretty high stakes, and there were lots of deaths, and it was a treasure hunt, but it never really felt dark or depressing, it was a fun light read. Next, I read Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate. So I picked this up on a Tuesday night, right as I was getting really sick, and I ended up reading it like all night, basically. I had a work meeting on Tuesday night, and then I went to bed, and I could not sleep, and so around like 2 a.m., I got up, and sitting in the glow of the Christmas tree, I basically read the whole book. it is so heartbreaking and so sad. Basically, it follows 5 siblings who were taken from their home on the river from their parents, who they did actually have parents who loved them and cared for them. And they were brought into an orphanage where then they were taken and adopted into higher class families. And it follows the Tennessee Children's Home and Georgetown scandal from like the 1940s. What's really sad is that it actually did happen with real people. Like the characters in the story were made up and fictional, but that was life for some children in that time, which is just so sad and terrible. There was one character in particular that it really hurt what happened to her. I mean, I was thinking about it for days after with goosebumps of just like, I didn't think she was going to disappear that quickly in the story, and we never got resolution with her, which I think is the reality for a lot of people in that time, and a lot of children who went through that, is that there really was no resolution. But it was really sad, and it was really hard to read. But I'm happy I was able to read it all at once because it was that good. But I've been wanting to read this book for years, and I got a copy of it last month, and so I was really excited to finally be able to read it. It deserves all of the acclaim that it got. It deserves it all. It was really amazing. After that, I beta read another book. I feel like I keep going from like gut-wrenching to fun, light, happy, airy, and then I go back to like death and sadness and despair. So this was no different. So after that, I read Writer on the Wall by Joanne Bischoff. So this was another beta read. And it's such a sweet story. It's about a single woman who is into writing and into rock climbing. It's just a fun, light read. The stakes aren't extremely high. It's not gonna kill you with intensity. It was really honestly kind of nice to have just a simple, sweet read, and it was just the type of story you want to read in front of your Christmas tree with a mug of tea or coffee, whatever you like, and just put your feet up by the fire, and it's just such a cozy read, and it was really fun. So make sure to check out Writer on the Wall when it comes out at the end of February. It was just such a sweet, cozy novel. After that, I really did go back to the dark despair. This wasn't quite as intense, let's say it like that. I did almost cry during this book, but it was just so well written and really awesome. This is of Love and Treason, and it is her debut novel from Tyndale. Let's just say it was so good. I actually accidentally had lunch with her at ACFW. She was part of a group when I was sitting with Kimberly Woodhouse for lunch, and she was there. So we chatted a little bit, and they told me a little bit about the book. So I was so excited to get my hands on this. This is coming out at the end of January. So another book that's coming out later and you can't read yet, but you need to get your hands on it. It was so good. It's the story of Valentine. So not everybody knows the story of Valentine's Day, but this takes the actual story of Saint Valentine and weaves it into fiction and weaves a story around it. So I've known the story of Valentine's Day for a long time, but it was so cool to actually read it as a fictionalized novel. So we don't know a ton about his story other than that when he was imprisoned before he was martyred, he interacted a lot with the jailer's daughter who was blind, and when he prayed over her, she was able to see. So that's kind of the gist of the story, but Jamie did a phenomenal job making it really come to life. It was just so amazing. I will say though, it is really hard to read a book like this knowing that the main character is going to be martyred, because he is such an awesome character. She did an amazing job bringing him to life. He's not as old as I thought he was going to be. I mean, I guess when you say saint, I usually think of like an older guy with a white beard, and he didn't have that. He was, in this story, he was a lot younger. I don't know if we know how old he was in actual history, but she used her creative license and really brought him to life, which I loved. I also really loved Iris. She was so sympathetic right from the beginning, and as a blind young woman in her time, her plight was really well written and engaging. Overall, I just felt like the cast of characters was so interesting and interactive. I didn't feel like they were just names on a page, which is a pet peeve of mine when it's like we have a huge cast of characters, but they just feel like names. So I loved how these characters all came to life. I will say this book brings up a lot of questions, but it also offers a lot of answers. I really appreciate how a lot of the topics, they had a lot of hard topics that were discussed, but it never felt preachy or over the top. Instead, it felt really poignant and well-timed, and it was just overall a really, really well put together story. As things were falling apart, I was so totally on the verge of tears. All the emotions with the stakes, it was just super high. I started it in the evening and I finished it within 24 hours, and it's not a short book. So I would really recommend that you put this on your order list for Valentine's Day and read it around Valentine's Day because it's just such a good reminder of what Valentine's Day is actually about and the real reason why we celebrate it every year. So overall, those are the books that I read in December. So it was such a wide variety of books, from historical fiction to biblical fiction to fantasy. I don't know what Ignite is. I think it's fantasy. I don't really read fantasy, so I don't really know the genre at all. But it was just such a wide variety of stories, and they were all so good. So if you read any books in December, I would love to know what they were. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the books that I read. So make sure to drop a comment and let me know what your favorite books were that you read in December, or all the books that you read in December, because I'd love to know. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week with my favorite books that I read in 2023. I keep saying it's just so good, but it really was. I need to focus. What's the point of that? Well, welcome to December's reading recap. And that's all I know what to say. I don't have any idea what to say after that.